She came to him with nothing. What she said changed everything. The rain hammered against the old farmhouse windows like an urgent messenger demanding attention. Sarah pulled her thin jacket tighter as she stood on the covered porch, water dripping from her hair onto the weathered wooden boards beneath her feet. She had walked for miles through the storm, her worn sneakers providing little protection against the puddles that had claimed the country road. Behind the door, she could hear the soft sounds of evening life, the creak of floorboards, the distant hum of a radio. Her heart pounded as she raised her trembling hand to knock. What was she doing here? She didn't even know this man's name, had only heard from someone in town that he lived alone and might need help with farm work. The door opened to reveal a tall man in his 40s, with kind eyes that seemed to take in her bedraggled state without judgment. His flannel shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, and his hands bore the calluses of honest work. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," Sarah began, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I heard you might have work available. I can clean, cook, help with animals, whatever you need." The man studied her face, seeing something there that made him step back and gesture inside. "Come in before you catch pneumonia. I'm James." The warmth of the house enveloped her like an embrace. The living room was simple but comfortable, with a stone fireplace crackling cheerfully and shelves lined with well-read books. Sarah felt like she was stepping into a world she'd only imagined, one where peace existed. "When did you last eat?" James asked, already moving toward the kitchen. "Yesterday morning, I think." The admission embarrassed her, but his matter-of-fact acceptance made it easier to bear. He prepared a simple meal of soup and bread while she sat wrapped in a quilt he'd brought from upstairs. They ate in comfortable silence, the storm raging outside while warmth and safety surrounded them within these walls. "There's a spare room upstairs," he said finally. "We can talk about work in the morning when you're rested." Sarah wanted to protest that she needed to prove her worth immediately, that she understood the unspoken arrangements people usually expected, but something in his gentle manner stopped her. This man was different. That night, lying in clean sheets for the first time in weeks, Sarah listened to the storm gradually fade. Through the thin walls, she could hear James moving around downstairs, banking the fire, checking the locks. Normal sounds of home that she'd almost forgotten existed. She had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of fear. But as sleep finally claimed her, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she was safe, warm, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt like she might actually be worth saving. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Sarah descended the stairs, uncertain what to expect. She found James at the table with coffee and fresh eggs, reading a newspaper as if having a stranger in his house was the most natural thing in the world. "Sleep well?" he asked, looking up with a smile that reached his eyes. "Better than I have in months," she admitted, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "About that work first, breakfast. Then we'll figure out how you can help around here." Over the following weeks, Sarah threw herself into every task she could find. She cleaned the house from top to bottom, organized his workshop, tended the small vegetable garden behind the house, and prepared meals with ingredients she found in his well-stocked pantry. James never asked questions about her past, never made her feel like she owed him anything beyond honest work. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her one afternoon as she scrubbed the front porch steps for the third time that week. "You're not a servant here, Sarah. You're a person who needed help, and now you're helping me in return. That's how community works." But Sarah struggled to believe she deserved such kindness without strings attached. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she tried to express her gratitude in the only way she'd learned. James gently but firmly declined, his voice kind but clear. "That's not what I want from you. I'm not keeping some kind of tab where you owe me payment. You're safe here, and your worth isn't tied to what you can give me." The rejection stung at first, not because she wanted to be with him that way, but because it was the only currency she'd known. How else could she ensure she wouldn't be cast out? As autumn painted the trees in brilliant colors, Sarah began to understand. James showed her respect through his actions, asking her opinion about household decisions, teaching her to use his woodworking tools, sharing stories about his late wife while they worked side by side in the garden. "She would have liked you," he said one day, showing Sarah a photograph of a woman with laugh lines around her eyes. "She always said this house was too quiet for just one person." Do you miss her terribly? Sarah asked. Every day. But grief doesn't mean you stop living. It means you carry love forward and share it with the people who need it. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. She was beginning to understand that love wasn't a transaction, it was a gift freely given. James had loved his wife completely, and that love had made him capable of extending kindness to others, not because he wanted something in return, but because love multiplied when shared. That night, for the first time since arriving, Sarah looked at herself in the mirror and saw more than just someone who had survived. She saw someone who was beginning to heal, someone who might actually have something valuable to offer the world beyond her body or her desperation. The woman staring back at her was still scared, still uncertain, but she was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was Sarah, and she was learning what it meant to be valued simply for existing. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the farm in pristine snow that made everything look like a fresh start. Sarah had been living with James for months, and she'd begun to believe that her old life couldn't touch her here. She helped him with his carpentry business, managing appointments and learning to sand wood smooth as glass. In the evenings, she'd started reading again, something she hadn't done since high school. But peace, she learned, was fragile. She was in town buying supplies when she saw him across the street. Marcus, the man who had convinced her that her only value lay in what she could do for others, who had taken her identification and bank cards for safekeeping, who had disappeared when she needed him most. Her hands began to tremble as their eyes met across the snowy street. Well. Little Sarah playing house with the local carpenter, Marcus said, approaching with that familiar smile that had once seemed charming but now looked predatory. Heard you've been living quite the domestic life. What do you want? She managed to whisper. Just checking on an old friend, making sure you remember where you came from. His voice carried an undertone of threat wrapped in false concern. You can't hide forever, Sarah. You know that. That evening, Sarah sat at James's kitchen table, her whole body shaking as she told him about the encounter. She waited for him to tell her she needed to leave, that she'd brought danger to his peaceful life. Instead, James reached across the table and took her hands in his steady ones. You're not going anywhere, he said firmly. This is your home now. But he knows where I am. He'll cause trouble, then we'll deal with it together. For the next few days, Sarah jumped at every sound, expecting Marcus to appear at their door. James never left her alone, arranging his work schedule so he could stay close to the house. He also quietly reached out to the local sheriff, a friend who understood the situation without needing all the details explained. Marcus did return, arriving late one night with alcohol on his breath and anger in his voice. Sarah heard his truck in the driveway and felt her old terror return, but this time, she wasn't alone. James met Marcus at the door with calm authority and a shotgun held casually but meaningfully in his hands. You're not welcome here, James said, his voice carrying a steel that Sarah had never heard before. Sarah has made it clear she doesn't want contact with you. She belongs with me, Marcus slurred. I know what she is, what she's good for. She belongs to herself, James replied, and she's chosen to be here. You need to respect that choice and leave. Behind James, Sarah found her voice. I was never yours, Marcus. I was just scared and alone, and you took advantage of that. But I'm not that person anymore. Something in her tone must have convinced Marcus that his hold over her was truly broken. He left that night and never returned, though Sarah kept expecting him to reappear for months afterward. How did you know what to do? She asked James later, as they sat by the fire. I didn't, he admitted. I just knew that everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home. And this is your home now, Sarah, for as long as you want it to be. That night, Sarah realized she had found something more valuable than shelter. She had found someone who would stand between her and the darkness without asking for anything in return. Spring brought new life to the farm and new possibilities to Sarah's heart. She had been living with James for almost a year, and somewhere along the way, gratitude had deepened into something more complex and beautiful. She found herself watching him work, admiring not just his kindness but the way his hands moved with confidence and skill. The way he listened when she spoke, the way he made her feel seen and valued. It frightened her, this growing affection. She had learned to trust James's friendship, but romantic love felt dangerous, like something that could be taken away or used against her. You're thinking too hard again, James observed one morning as they worked together in the garden, planting tomatoes and peppers for the summer. How can you tell? You get this little line between your eyebrows when you're wrestling with something. Want to talk about it? Sarah sat back on her heels, dirt under her fingernails, sunshine warming her face. What are we doing here, James? I mean, really doing? He set down his trowel and gave her his full attention. What do you mean? I'm a woman living in your house, sharing your meals, your daily life. People in town must wonder. People in town can mind their own business, he said gently. But I think you're asking about more than gossip. She nodded, heat rising in her cheeks. I care about you. More than I should. Maybe. More than is safe. James was quiet for a long moment, considering his words carefully. Sarah, I cared about you from the first night you knocked on my door. Not because you were beautiful or broken or because I wanted to fix you, but because you were brave enough to ask for help. That took incredible courage, but your wife will always be part of my heart. But hearts don't have limited space, Sarah. Love doesn't diminish when it's shared. It grows. That afternoon, they took a long walk through the woods behind the house, talking about dreams and fears, about the future they might build together. Sarah told him about her childhood, about art classes she'd loved before life became about survival. James talked about his hopes for the farm, about maybe expanding the vegetable garden into a small market operation. I'd like to paint again, Sarah said suddenly. I used to love it, before everything got so complicated. The next week, James surprised her with art supplies, canvases, brushes, and paints in every color imaginable. He'd converted the small sunroom into a studio, with good light and space for her to create. You did this for me? She asked, tears in her eyes. I did it for us, he replied. Your happiness makes me happy. Your dreams matter to me. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the summer twilight, James took her hand. I love you, Sarah. Not because you're grateful, not because you need rescuing, but because you're you. Strong, kind, creative, resilient. You. I love you too, she whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I never thought I could feel this way about anyone. Their first kiss was soft and sweet, tasting of possibility and hope. When they parted, Sarah felt like a different person than the one who had arrived in the storm a year ago. She was someone who could love and be loved in return, someone whose heart was big enough to hold both gratitude and genuine affection. Are you sure about this? She asked, vulnerability creeping into her voice. About us? James smiled, the same smile that had welcomed her that first night. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Part 5. Building for virtual years had passed since that stormy night when Sarah first knocked on James's door. The farmhouse had become more than a shelter. It was a home filled with laughter, creativity, and the kind of love that grows stronger with each passing day. Sarah's art had begun selling at the local gallery, her paintings capturing the beauty of rural life and the resilience of the human spirit. She'd also started volunteering at a women's shelter in the nearest city, using her story to help other women believe in the possibility of a different life. You have a gift for this, the shelter director told her after Sarah had spent an afternoon talking with newly arrived residents. You make them believe they're worth saving. Because they are, Sarah replied simply. We all are. At home, she and James had settled into a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. They worked together in the garden, shared meals filled with easy conversation, and spent evenings reading by the fire or planning improvements to the farm. James had proposed the previous Christmas, offering her a ring he'd carved himself from the wood of an old oak tree that had sheltered the house for decades. It's not traditional, he'd said, nervous as he presented the simple but beautiful band. It's perfect, Sarah had replied, because it was unique, handmade with love, and rooted in the place where they'd found each other. Their wedding was small and intimate, held in the garden they'd tended together, with only their closest friends as witnesses. Sarah wore her grandmother's dress, altered to fit her new life, and carried wildflowers they'd grown themselves. As they exchanged vows they'd written for each other, Sarah marveled at how far she'd traveled from that desperate woman who'd stood on this very porch believing she had nothing to offer. You taught me that love isn't something you earn, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. It's something you share, and I want to share all of my tomorrows with you. James's response was simple and perfect. You already gave me everything I needed the day you trusted me enough to stay. Now, standing in their kitchen on a bright morning in early fall, Sarah watched her husband, the words still sent a thrill through her, preparing breakfast while humming softly to himself. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the comfortable chaos of their shared life, his coffee cup next to her tea mug, her art supplies on the counter beside his carpentry catalogs, their lives intertwined in 1,000 small ways. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing her contemplative mood. "Just this, us. How different everything is now." He crossed to her, flour still dusting his hands from making pancakes, and pulled her into his arms. "Any regrets?" Sarah thought about the woman. She'd been scared, desperate, convinced she had nothing valuable to offer the world. Then she looked around at the life they'd built together, the art on the walls that she'd painted, the furniture he'd crafted with his own hands, the garden where they grew food for their table and flowers for their souls. "Only one," she said, smiling up at him. "I wish I could go back and tell that scared woman on your porch that the best part of her life was just beginning. She wouldn't have believed you," James said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "No," Sarah agreed, "but she would have hoped. And sometimes hope is enough to keep us going until love finds us." Outside, the world continued its ancient rhythm, seasons changing, storms passing, new growth following periods of dormancy. But inside their home, Sarah and James had created something timeless and true, a love built on respect, nurtured by kindness, and strengthened by the simple daily choice to see the best in each other. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because fairy tales ended. This was a beginning, the first chapter in a love story that would continue to unfold with each sunrise, each shared meal, each moment of choosing each other again and again.